First off, welcome back, everybody, to the EVN Media Festival. My name's Andy Laren. I'm a longtime reporter at the New York Times, NBC News, a lot of investigative work. It is my distinct honor to have this amazing panel. Now, all of these panelists are also spotlighted in other sessions. You can see more of their work in other sessions, and I greatly encourage you to not only see their sessions, but also check out the amazing things that they do. So to my far left is Molly Crabapple, who is an incredible artist. If you have not done so, I encourage you all to meander up the street a little bit, where you could see her incredible mural, still in progress?
Still in progress, one day away from completion.
One day away from completion of the poet Shoshanik Goorjian.
Shoshanik.
And you can see her her interpretation of the great Armenian poet's life and her village, where she comes from.
Second largest city in Armenia.
Yes. Pardon me. And then then next closest to me is Ben Mauk. And Ben is an incredible journalist writer who has written for The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, Harper's, and he has won a Peabody as well. Closest to me is Michael Goorjian, who has been shortlisted for an Oscar, has been on such television shows as David's Mother and Party of Five, and is also a novelist.
In my spare time.
In your spare time. Which means that since the title of this panel is Visualizing Realities, from illustrations to virtual reality, creative ways to tell stories, one of the things that's terribly interesting is that all of the panelists here do not use just one medium for telling their stories. I'm going to start off with Ben. So Ben, going through your work, recent New York Times Magazine piece, going through a hiking trail in Kurdistan. Tell us a little bit about that work.
Oh, sure. So a lot of my work deals with kind of peripheries and border politics, and also minority rights issues and human rights issues. So Kurdistan was a place that was on my radar for a long time. I wanted to do some reporting there. And I also wanted to get there. There's this thing you do when you're writing a book where you try to convince a magazine to send you to a place so that they will pay for you to go, and then you can do research for your book in secret while you're doing the fake magazine story. So it wasn't fake, but the story that I did for the Times Magazine was about a walking trail, and it was the first walking trail in the region. Going through areas that had previously been and some still were, heavily landmined from various conflicts. But the research that I was doing there for my book was about Kurdistan as an idea and as kind of an autonomous region or semi-autonomous region within Iraq, and then an autonomous non-state administration in Syria. So these spaces are interesting to me. I had also just finished this project for The New Yorker that had taken a couple years on Xinjiang, on mass reeducation, and the persecution of minorities, and I was really ready for a lighter. I mean, a lot of my stuff is pretty heavy, and the idea of doing a hiking kind of a travel piece was I thought, oh, this will be relaxing. So I went and I hiked 12 miles a day, and was told where to avoid the landmines. So that was my relaxing story that I did.
So you're doing that hike, and one of the things about that piece is it's in the more traditional, what we might consider journalism, magazine piece, written, accompanying photographs, beautiful mountainside shots, stunningly told. And then to go to your Xinjiang work, which you just alluded to, you've written about Xinjiang for The New Yorker, but you haven't just written about it the way you did the Kurdistan piece. You also turned that into a VR film, virtual reality film. Just quickly describe that film for us.
Sure. So you probably know that virtual reality is this thing where you put on a headset and it kind of creates an immersive space around you. And it can really feel like you're in a space. They have all these modern tricks like stereoscopic. Your left eye will see one thing and your right eye will see another. It creates the illusion of depth. They'll have audio that makes it sound like noises are coming from different points in space. Me and a team of other people, particularly the filmmaker Sam Olsen, we collaborated on a project that incorporated a virtual reality film and an immersive feature for The New Yorker and a few other things as well on this mass internment campaign in Xinjiang, in which more than 1 million Uyghurs and Kazakhs and other Turkic Muslims in China were interned in reeducation camps, political reeducation camps, basically. And the film follows the story of 3 men who I had discovered in Kazakhstan, who had, I had learned of their existence, who had been imprisoned in the same camp at the same time, which was quite rare. So it was kind of a rare opportunity to triangulate information about the same quite inaccessible space and to actually construct that space in virtual reality so we could put viewers inside this camp and give them a sense of what their experiences were like. And that's why we chose VR, because of how inaccessible the space was and how rare it was to get, to be able to kind of cross-corroborate information about these prisons. It was very rare to find multiple people who had been in the same camp. So that's kind of what inspired the medium for doing that project.
So you're able to get, essentially get cameras inside when you can't get cameras inside. You're using animation and you're doing a lot of traditional storytelling, and you've actually been able to translate some of the work you've done for print into a VR piece, overlapping, but also maybe taking advantage of the different mediums.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think like most writers, probably when we come to a story, we're thinking about how the form will complement the content. And, each story is kind of its own puzzle. You're figuring out what the structure should be like. Is this something where we follow one character through a whole story? Or is it something where we have 10 different characters and it's kind of a panoramic view of a place? And in reporting on Xinjiang, there's these special challenges. You can't get into these camps. It's very difficult to report from inside China. You're limited in a lot of ways to like eyewitness testimony, satellite photos, and of course I'm speaking especially of the time when I was reporting, 2018, 2019. So I'd already done a few pieces on Xinjiang. I'd done a magazine story, and I was unhappy with that. I felt like the form did not quite match the type of information I was getting. What I was getting was incredible eyewitness accounts and really in-depth, horrifying, tragic accounts of people who had been themselves detained or who had had family members detained. So then the next thing I did on Xinjiang, which I viewed as kind of the major human rights crisis at the moment I was writing about it, was I did an oral history. Because for me, an oral history was a way to get these testimonies in kind of a fuller, more robust way to a readership in kind of unvarnished form or unmediated by my reporting techniques or my stylizations. And the oral history was really successful, and it was the first kind of thing that had come out on Xinjiang that was sort of a big collection of testimonies. A lot of academics ended up using it for their work who were studying Xinjiang. So then it was kind of like, what next? Like, what else can I do? And again, the sort of aha moment was finding these 3 men who were willing to do an interview, to do very long interviews with me and with my collaborators, and who had been in the same camp at the same time and had just amazing information about what these camps were like. When they got up in the morning, what they had to study, they were tortured, how were they tortured, what were these camps trying to do in their point of view. And they were indeed quite enthusiastic about getting their story out to an international audience, so they were kind of gung-ho for this project. So me and this filmmaker, Sam Olsen, who's worked in VR before, we approached The New Yorker with this idea, and they sent Sam and me, and we also insisted that they send the artist who we chose with us to Kazakhstan to conduct these interviews. And the reason we did that was because we felt it was so important to get the artist in the room to kind of capture the particulars of the interviews and how the three men were kind of like moving in space, how they acted, and also to have the artist ask questions about the spaces that we, I primarily work with text, would not think to ask. Like he asked about what the lighting was like. I never would have thought to ask what the lighting was like in the cell. And then, we used all this information ultimately to build these spaces, hand drawing everything, but then ultimately putting it into a three-dimensional space that we then animated and turned into a film.
Now we're lucky.
Sorry if I was rambling.
No, that was great.
I can go on.
We have a filmmaker here, but before we get to the filmmaker, I'd actually like to go to essentially the other person on the opposite side of that equation, which is the artist. But you also write, of course, because no one here does just one thing. You, Molly, your career is incredible. You started drawing when you were 4. Even when you were detained at one point, I read that you would draw in a styrofoam cup because
with my fingernail, yeah.
Yeah, because that was the only way you could draw while you were in detention. I want you to, one of the things I was hoping to show is just a quick look at some of your work in Syria. We can't do the visuals for it, but when you were working with Marwan Hisham, and you were working on telling what was going on, not just in Syria, but in parts of ISIS-held Syria. This is not an area you could go to.
Of course not, no.
And so you're facing the similar hurdles to what Ben was just describing that he faced. I can't go there. I want to practice my skills, my craft, my art. So tell us about how you went about taking his stories and his accounts and started working on what became an amazing book.
Thank you. I'll just give some backstory about how me and Marwan started working together.
Please.
In 2014, there was a group of people on Twitter who would discuss the Syrian war. Some of them were people inside Syria. Some of them were activists. Some were journalists, people who worked for think tank. Some of them were trolls and idiots. But it was a group of people that would talk to each other. And one of them was a young man who was going by a different name at the time, who was inside ISIS-occupied Raqqa and was still surreptitiously tweeting. And me and him struck up a friendship on Twitter DMs. A lot of it is I was studying Arabic then. He was an English literature graduate, and we both loved words. And he would introduce me to the poetry of Nizar Kabani. I would introduce him to Nabokov, and we became friends. And one day I had this idea. I was like, obviously no one can draw Raqqa. It's occupied by ISIS. They will kill you if you try to chronicle it in any way that's outside of their censorship. But I asked him if he had photos that were from before the war or that were from the early days of the revolution, just things, that he already had on his phone. And I said, I could draw from them. We can make a collaboration. You can write to go along with it. I have some media contacts. And he was like, man, I'll do you one better. I will take photos. And I was like, dude, you're fucking crazy. You're gonna get yourself killed. Are you nuts? And he's lied to me and was like, no, it's fine. And he gave me these photos of daily life in Raqqa, of the type of things that only someone who was born in that city and knew every bit of it intimately would even think to take. Photos of the guys in front of the internet cafe, photos of kids going through the trash to find things to sell, photos of the bread lines, photos of the ISIS traffic cops that didn't have whistles because whistles are an instrument, looking at women. And I drew from these photos, and we did this collaboration together for Vanity Fair. From this collaboration, we ended up doing 2 more the same way. When I told him, I was like, man, we should do a book together. But if we do a book together, you can't write a book on your phone in Raqqa. You got to come to Turkey, But I have some contacts, and I can, make it worth your while, right? So you can, have money when you come to Turkey. We'll get a book deal. We'll do this, and that is what we did. We created a book together. And by created together, I mean every single aspect. Like, we wrote it together. Like, I would write sentences, he would rewrite me, I would rewrite him. We also did the art together, even though he's not an artist. And it was a book about his life as a young working class guy in Raqqa, and his two best friends, and the revolution, the war, ISIS, about disillusionment, exile, and the meaning of home. And the way that we did these drawings was actually the most rigorous way I have worked in my entire life. The Marwan Hisham fact-checking department kicks the ass of the New York Times fact-checking department. Marwan was very concerned about the cliched and stupid ways that the Middle East is portrayed in the West. And he was like, none of that is gonna make it into any book with my name on it. So the way that we worked to get his memories is, first we made a list. We're like, we wanna do this, pictures of this protest of the Ali Babimsi protest. This was a young man who was killed by the Syrian military in the early days. So I would interview him, and I'd be like, what are the things you remember? And he said, like, I remember people holding up their phones to try to document what was going on while there were like these clouds of tear gas and while other people were literally hiding behind stuff. And then I would find any citizen footage that I could, of which there was, a lot in the Syrian war. And I would freeze frame it over and over again. I would look at what people were wearing, what kind of shoes they were wearing, angles of buildings. And I would do a sketch based on that. And then he'd be like, nah, that's bullshit, or that's good, that's what I remember. And I would do more and more sketches until I felt like I had downloaded his memories, is the best way to describe it, until I had done something that was like real, both real in the sense that everyone's shoes were the right type of shoes, but also real in an emotional sense. And then I would do these like giant black and white drawings. And that was something that I could do for stuff where there was photography and videography, like the early days of the revolution. But then there are other moments that I could not. For instance, there was an internet cafe that was filled with like severely wounded ISIS fighters, like guys like missing their legs and stuff. And obviously there were no photos of that online. So for something like that, what I would do was I would be so specific. I'd be like, what kind of plastic chair? Find me a photo of the type of plastic chair that they used. Find me a photo of the type of cup that they would use to serve like fruit cocktail. I would draw the guys' faces. Sometimes he would skewer me. He would be like, what is that cliched shit that you did there? Is that like a, caricature? What is that? Other times, I'd get it right. And these were true collaborations that were his memories, his input, and my pen. And it was a very hard process. It's not something that I would ever do again with probably with anyone. We fought like cats. All artists are egomaniacs. No one likes to give anyone else that much input over their work. But I think it's also some of the strongest work of my career. And yeah, it was a mixture of interview, asking your subject to find like visual aids, like the type of plastic chair, using every manner of publicly accessible photographic and videographic information, taking that and combining that together.
And I know that we're unable to show some of the samples of your work, but for those who are not familiar with Molly's work, and you can correct me, please, but her drawings are not photorealistic, but they do have, you have very strong lines where you convey the emotion of a face, where you convey the emotions of what's going on, and you get a sense of the background. And also, you do, aside from when you're working in black and white in color, you will do a lot to set a mood with color too.
Absolutely. I mean, my big visual influence when I was growing up was the type of 19th century illustration that is currently on display in the gallery over here. That old school black and white, incredibly satirical, incredibly detailed, incredibly mean newspaper illustration of the turn of the century. So that's like where I kind of draw my inspiration from. It's why I was so excited to see that show here. I was like, damn, I knew that from New York. I didn't know it from Armenia, and I'm learning so much. But yeah, that's definitely the style. And then of course I do it in my own way.
Great. So, one of the things that I'm trying to talk here about are origin stories, how you guys go about your work. Michael, your movie's incredible. I don't know if, aside, it's people will laugh and cry. If they don't, I don't quite know what's wrong with them, but it's an incredibly touching movie. If I were to show a clip right now, one of the things that I think is profound and moving are the scenes where you don't really hear people talking, where you see, for those who are not familiar, Merakatsi is about an American who decides that he wants to return to his Armenian roots. He has an opportunity during the post-war Stalin years, and he gets a ticket to Armenia. And very quickly he's imprisoned. And very quickly, he, in an almost Charlie Chaplin-esque fashion, finds a way to crawl up through a window, and he's watching a man across the street, watching his life. And as he's watching his life, he starts imagining being part of it. You see them sitting at a dinner table, and he takes his tin prison cup, and he's doing cheers, with them. He's, when he can't see, he's upset. He has the orders of the toast to who's getting which toast.
It's a very, very Armenian thing.
Right?
Yes.
But you have your character that there's scenes where there's no words at all. You're watching this as if this is almost a black and white silent film, and you're drawing that. But the way that you found that story, that core of your narrative of this incredible movie, is surprisingly not from Armenia. You were working in, of all things, a circus act.
Well, I wasn't in the act.
But
I was
in a circus.
Yeah. I'm not a trapeze performer. I was directing a circus, yes.
So please tell us about that, about how you found this story.
Sure, yeah. I became friends with a Ukrainian magician named Yevgeny Voronin. Don't ask how. I beat him at chess. That's how we became friends. They're in Eastern Europe primarily. There's what's called Spiegel tent, which is a form of circus that it's dinner and circus acts, and it's a whole evening. It's a big thing. So he dragged me into helping direct one of these. Yevgeny is Ukrainian. He told me he has all these incredible stories. One of the stories he told me was about someone he knew who was in prison, who could see into an apartment building just beyond the wall of the prison, and they had for years watched. There was another man living in this prison, or in the apartment, and it's different than what's in the film. But what struck me about that story was his friend. After years, the guy in the prison didn't show up one day, and he said his friend flipped out and was wanted to try to break out of prison to find out what happened to him because he cared so much. And that always struck me because it kind of reveals an aspect of humanity that I don't think we see in a film that much. But just that if we don't see something, it's easy to not care. But the more we can see someone and learn about them and understand, the more we can't help but care. And so that idea was something I think he told me about that probably in 20 years ago, something like that. I was in LA, and I had a film project that I've been trying to make for many years, and again, we had the financing, and then it all fell apart. So I was kind of struggling to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I actually was with a good friend of mine who's a journalist who came to Armenia with me the first time I came in 2006. And he said, hey, well, why don't you do something about your roots? When we came in 2006, I screened another film I had made called Illusion here. And I made a promise to a friend of mine, Artsvi, during the screening that I would come back and make a film in Armenia. And I was kind of joking. But anyways, Eric was like, you should do that. Go, find a story. So this was in 2018 and during the revolution. And I, like many Armenians in the diaspora, I was watching what was going on. And I saw there was a lot of young people in Armenia, a lot of people from the diaspora. And somehow that led me to reading an article about repatriation. So knowing I had the story from my friend Veronin, I kind of have for a long time been going, well, where could I place that story? And when I learned about repatriation, it was actually about there have been many sort of phases. From that article, it led me to learn about this post-Stalin era where he had gone out to the diaspora with a lot of propaganda. And Molly, you should see some of the stuff that was sent out. A lot of it's photographs, but there's illustrations as well, just propaganda about what Armenia was like for all these, for the diaspora. Like, come back to Armenia. It's like women running through grape fields. And of course, it was all lies.
Those tour guys down the street were promising us that we could go see women
running through grape fields. Yeah, well. So anyways, those two ideas kind of combined, and I thought, oh, here's a way to tell the story I wanted to tell, which is really not an Armenian story, as you said. But for me, one of the reasons for making the film is so much of the films that have been made about Armenia or in Armenian aren't that accessible for non-Armenians. And I feel like it's important, if to be able to share who we are, we need films that are more accessible. So having the story really be about a prisoner and a guard, it just happens to take place in Armenia, allowed for me to make a film that helped kind of expose Armenia to non-Armenians. And with the concept, the idea was, by using voyeurism, instead of making a film that was like, here's Armenia, let me shove it in your face, this situation allows for something where Charlie's coming back in hopes of learning about Armenia, and he ends up finding the Soviet Union. Everything that I wanted to say or show about Armenia, I shoved it inside the apartment, so the audience with Charlie is learning little bits and pieces about Armenia, but like being a prisoner, now instead of being shoved in your face, you're leaning in and going, wait, what are they eating? What's that music they're playing? And that's, to me, that's the power of that idea of voyeurism, is it pulls you in. So that's how I
a different version of Rear Window.
Yeah.
And one of the things, so your protagonist, because he's you, the actor, since you are an outsider coming in, you're learning about Armenia and your Armenian roots during the course of the narrative, and you're seeing little bits of what it means to be an Armenian all the way through the whole course of the movie. It doesn't come rushing at you.
Yeah. One other thing, just in terms of storytelling and figuring out things, a lot of what the film, the side of the film that was the Soviet Armenia, and the guy in the apartment, his experience, his story, a lot of that was developed here once I got here and I was prepping and everything from Armenians that had grown up in Soviet Armenia, because it was very hard. You were saying, like, I have no idea what refrigerator they had, or what the windows looked like. Or I remember with our production designer, I had all these scenes where the guy comes with the food for me. I had designed all the shots around the idea that he would actually come into the cell and set the tray down or whatever. and he was doing the set, and he put one of these things in the door that flips open to put the food in. And I was like, oh, I did all that. He was like, I'll quit the film if we don't do this. This is how it was. This is how it was. It wouldn't be the other way. So I, luckily, because what I'm doing is collaborative, I was able to use the people that knew better than me to help design that side of the story.
Well, the clip that I was hoping to show, but if I could describe it, so it's a moment where you're just come back from the pounding rocks. You come back in the cell, hear the thud of the door, and your first thing you do instead of collapsing and resting is you prop up your bed, climb up your bed so then you could look through the window to what's going across the street. And then not just the toasting are you doing, but then the family start dancing, so you start dancing along. And then you use that very door that you're describing where the guards quietly open up the door and they see Charlie, your character, dancing, and they start thinking he's lost it.
Yeah.
And you use it to great comic effect. So you didn't have that written in when you first were...
Oh, I did, because that's the top slot.
Oh, I see.
I'm talking about the bottom slot.
Ah,
Yeah.
You use that too very well in the course of the movie.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, here's the thing is that the concern for a script like this is that there is such little dialogue. And not only that, but probably 70% of the film on paper is one person sitting looking out of a window at an apartment. And so you imagine shooting that, you go, okay, the whole movie is going to be looking at some guy's face and an apartment. That's it. Is that going to work? Are people going to get bored? I mean, on paper, it's really challenging to go see that it can work. So that was, so we actually did do a lot to figure out ways to take that and make it more dynamic. I mean, the apartment really is a miniature play and was presented that way, flat. But everything from how the set dresser built, how we built the cell, we actually had it. You feel it, you don't see it. But as the movie goes on, we had the walls so they could move, and we kind of slowly made the cell bigger.
Wow.
So we really tried to find ways, and even that going. I wanted the guy to come in because now it's people and whatever, to have everything be stuck between a door, faces and window. But it ends up working in the film. But it's hard to. That's one of the things with films that a lot of times how films get messed up is that translation from what's on the page to actually happening. It's hard to trust because on the page certain things everybody reads it different. And what they imagine, if it's not easy to imagine, it's a producer will go, I'm not sure about this. Yeah.
And you obviously you had that vision. One of the things too, though, since we are talking, it's a movie, and clearly it's fiction, but obviously it's based on a reality from a nearby country, kind of nearby country, clearly a reality. But one of the things that's interesting that you were telling me earlier is that you also read accounts, at least one book of an Americazzi.
Yes, I spent a good deal of time interviewing mostly descendants of repatriates, but several repatriates as well. And then I did research. I read books. One of our producers comes from a family who repatriated from Egypt, and he had a collection of the propaganda that had been sent out to Armenians to kind of lure them there. So I tried to do as much research as possible. And yes, it's not a film based on like one person's story. And part of that is because if it was, it becomes more historic fiction and more. The movie isn't about repatriation.
Right.
It's about a guard and a prisoner and their relationship. So, I was able to, because it's not based on a true story, it's more of a fable. I did take from all sorts of stories. So there are details in the film that are all true, and a lot of them, some people don't. People go, well, that can't be real. That's comedy. Like getting arrested for wearing a tie. That's an actual thing. Or Tigran, the guy in the apartment, we find out he's an artist, and then eventually we learn that he's been censured for painting pictures of churches. Just painting pictures of churches, that he was going to get sent to Siberia, but then his brother-in-law ends up getting him a job as a guard. That's true.
I was just at the Syrian Museum down the street, and I was speaking to Syrian's granddaughter, and I asked her, I noticed that there are no paintings between 1945 and 1954. And she said he had to destroy them all for similar reasons that you have in your movie.
Yeah, so this was another producer involved with the film. His grandfather was sent to Siberia for painting pictures of churches. So we have lots of details in the film that are all real, but it's it's like it was easier for me as a filmmaker to create fiction, and I mean also because for me filmmaking, underneath it all is you have the ability to affect people emotionally, and that's the power of it. And when I'm looking for story, or I feel like that's what I'm trying to attend to the most, is what's under the story that can get to people in a way that can't if I'm just, it's a real account. That's what I like about narrative storytelling.
And I do think that there is emotion that comes through all of your work. Ben, one of the things that's really interesting about your work in VR film, you're translating your incredible journalism to animation and getting that onto made to film, but in 3D. So when you look at the flats, it's not like a flat draw. It's not a drawing in a typical sense. It's got these curves that are designed so that when you're looking at it in 3D, it looks flat, but instead it's got these weird curves running through it. One of the things that was interesting, I saw an image of you guys going and correcting, moving things around. Tell us about the verification that you would go through to do this.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, VR was a really interesting and difficult medium to work in. It was a new medium for me. It had a lot of challenges. It might seem like VR is like film, but it is nothing like film because you cannot direct the viewer's attention by cutting to something. You can't zoom. Sometimes we would get notes on early drafts from people at the New Yorker, and they would say, can you zoom in on this thing? And actually you can't. It's just reality. It's just what's around you. And a lot of the kind of attention to verisimilitude that Molly and Michael are talking about, we also, it sounds very familiar, like we wanted to get everything right. A big argument I would constantly have with my collaborator, with the filmmaker, was whether we should be describing this as forensic or not. And I felt that precisely because it was animated, we owed it to ourselves to achieve a kind of forensic verisimilitude with what these spaces were like. But in VR, that meant we had to know what everything in every direction looked like, and these were small spaces, but we had to get the lights right. We had to find out what brand of security camera was being used, and if we chose to depict a space and we selected spaces for kind of both narrative and journalistic reasons, we had to know exactly what that space looked like. And sometimes this created like really labor-intensive moments. Like there's in these camps, there's big classrooms where 90 to 100 people are being educated at once, and the students are behind bars, and there's armed guards on the other side with the teacher at the chalkboard, and they would teach Chinese language, they would teach about the dangers of Islam, they would teach Communist Party propaganda, and we put 90 people in this room and then realized that actually before they got to attend these sessions, their heads were shaved. So we had to shave all their heads, which meant that Matt, the artist, had to redraw all the figures so that because it was really, because it was animated and because these spaces are so contested, and China denies that these spaces exist at all, and we were trying to counter that with, an excess of eyewitness testimony and other types of evidence too. It was really important that no one could look at this space and say, well, this is an anime, this is a children's movie. It was really vital for us to get these spaces right. And VR presented special challenges, but at the same time, you could enter these spaces like you can't with an illustration. And we were simultaneously concerned with the fact that what was coming out about the camps in like the Times and the Post and these kind of newspaper accounts, when they had these visual elements of the camps or the prison system, they were very sterile. They were very kind of like 3D computer-generated building models. And you could kind of forget that these buildings were filled with people who had been like torn from their families, who were being detained indefinitely because of their ethnic background, because of their religious background. So it was important for us, I think any story, is, I think most people here are journalists, there's always a tension between narrative and information, right? You're always trying to feel, if you're writing in something with a narrative, you're condensing time, you're choosing spaces, you can't give all the information. And VR is a very information-sparse environment. You can't overwhelm the viewer with action because it's intense being in there, and you need to let the viewer kind of look around. So we had to choose the type of information we could convey, but at the same time, the visual and spatial information we could convey journalistically was like nothing I've experienced in any other medium. And then you also mentioned there were elements with the fact that we chose to hand draw everything, which were not challenges I had to face, luckily. But Matt, the artist, had to foreshorten things, depending on where he had to learn how to kind of draw with the idea that what he drew on paper was going to get scanned, but then it was going to get put into a three-dimensional space using, computer software. So that was kind of an additional stage of the challenge. But in the end, I think if you watch it in a headset, which I encourage you, it's hard to do. This was kind of part of the frustrations that we knew not many people would be able to see this film as we were making it. We did ultimately make a theatrical adaptation. But if you watch it in a headset, even though it's animated, like I find it really compellingly realistic. The spaces are really claustrophobic. You feel like you're in the prison cell. You feel like you're in the yard. When we created the scene of the yard, we found satellite images. We transposed them to ground level. The camp, a lot of these camps had previously been other kinds of buildings in Xinjiang. In Tachang is where this one was. This one happened to be a retirement home. And we found someone in Kazakhstan who was able to get on WeChat photos of what this retirement home looked like before it had been transformed into a prison. Between the time we downloaded them and the film came out, those were wiped. Those were disappeared. So we got really lucky with a lot of the information we were able to collect. I forget what your question was now, but yeah.
In other words, like unlike Michael, you couldn't expand the walls out.
No, yeah, but any medium has its own unique challenges. So for me, just doing this in VR was, it had these interesting informational challenges and interesting narrative challenges, and it was great to work in a team, which was also unusual for me because we could argue about this stuff, and I could, I was arguing we need more we need to hear more of the. Because you hear the actual, the men that we interviewed, we used their audio and then with English dubs over, but you can hear their actual voices. I always wanted more lines of dialogue explaining what was going on. And Sam, who's a more experienced filmmaker, I see you're nodding, you're like, yeah, less dialogue. Right. But also experience in VR is like, look, it's really hard to it's really hard to be in these spaces and it's overwhelming, and just let people experience the environment, and that has its own intense drama in this particular medium.
Molly, you have an incredible range of work. So not only are you doing your journalistic endeavors, but you have murals, you have art that you could describe as activist art, with slogans saying Slava Ukraina, with paint drawings like that. You have a range of work that does capture, outrage, anger, let's take chargeness, if that's a word. But in your journalism, you are also very precise as well. So could you tell us about the extra steps that you take when you're working for a journalistic endeavor? How do you go about making sure that you've got things right?
It's actually an interesting question that you ask about the extra steps. So I got my start not as a journalist. I got my start as an artist, and as one that drew in nightclubs specifically. I literally would sit on the edge of a stage, and girls would be stripping, and circus performers would be doing backflips, and I would be there with my sketch pad. And the skills that you learn there, which is how to draw fast, how to get the summation of someone in only a few lines, how to draw while people are jostling your arm and it's dark and your boss has just spilled a glass of vodka on you. Those are the same skills that you learn when you're drawing in a protest or in a war zone. It's not that there are like extra magic steps that you take to get something to be accurate. You draw what's in front of you and you don't lie. That's how you do journalistic art. You just don't lie. And to me, the places where it's extra interesting are the places where art can do something that a photograph couldn't. For instance, I covered Guantanamo Bay. And as anyone who's ever covered a prison anywhere knows, prisons are the most censored places on earth. And Guantanamo Bay, which is a torture camp, is more censored than almost any prison. And what that means in practice is that a photographer would walk around and there'd be a military guy next to him. And the military guy would say, yeah, you can shoot anything here, just no one's face, and no cameras, and no doors, and no windows also. And before you know it, where are you pointing your camera, right? You're pointing it directly at the floor. As an artist, I didn't have those constraints. I was able to draw full rooms. I was able to draw the pretrial hearings of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I was able to draw the captives at Guantanamo for the 5 minutes that they let us, see them. I was able to draw the incredibly sinister cultural sensitivity officer, Zach, who helped design religiously specific tortures for them. And what did I do with my art that was different than a photograph? When I drew soldiers, I didn't, give them a fake face. That would hide that I was being censored. I gave them these crazy smiley face masks. And the reason was that I thought that what was important wasn't what some Yahoo from Tennessee looked like. I thought what was important was that these people were cogs and that they were parts of this machine. And so I emphasize that, and I just trust everyone who will see my work will not think that everyone in Gitmo is going around with blank smiley masks and that they can, get a metaphor.
But yet, in those drawings, you have the smiley mask, but yet their body,
everything else is real.
The energy, the lines that you have are not flat, smiley face lines. They are very much capturing the way a body is moving.
And also all drawn physically from life. I'm literally there with my sketch pad while the military guy is hauling me around or standing over my shoulder. So they're all drawn fast, and they're all drawn with me trying to take as much as I possibly can succinctly with as few lines as possible. And it's the same, if I was drawing at a protest and there was a police line jostling me, right? Or if I was surreptitiously drawing at a checkpoint.
Right. Right. So, Michael, one of the things that you face working in film is that it's by definition a collaboration. You've written a script, you're the lead actor, people may think it's all on you. Is it?
No, kind of the opposite. Yeah, the way that I do, the way I'm able to do more than one thing, and honestly, it wasn't all by choice. To make a film like this, it's not the easiest thing to get financing for. It's not the easiest thing to. Film is is collaborative, it's also one of the only things it's as much a business as it is art. And unfortunately, the business side is really taken over because there's a lot of money involved. And so the people that make decisions now are the people that are doing the money and less the art. Anyways, for me to act and direct, do those roles, the only way I can do it is by relying on the people I'm working with. So for this, like my cinematographer, the first AD, I'm giving them everything possible before we shoot. My cinematographer knew everything I was after. Occasionally, I would look at a monitor and be like, okay, that looks right. But I really, really just trusted him to do what he's supposed to do, which is he's the cinematographer. The same with the AD in terms of running the set. So it's kind of the opposite in that I end up, by doing more things, I have to rely on everybody more.
And as part of the collaboration on your film set, you were also saying that you were also hearing what Armenians on the set were telling you and incorporating that in your storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't, because I don't speak Armenian, or I Mikich a little bit, I was hearing through a translator. So, yeah, I mean, we had probably around 3 months of prep before we started shooting. And then because of COVID, we ended up shooting for another, for a very long period of time. So a lot of that happens beforehand and then ended up in the film.
One Armenian friend who saw the film said he watched you, and I know that films are often shot non-sequentially, so you may shoot the middle scene first and the beginning scene at the end. But he said one of the things that he noticed is that you begin the movie with a very Americanized Armenian accent, and towards the end of the movie, you have a much more precise use of the language. Intentional?
Again, relying on others. Like, how do I say it? Okay. I had my producer was our producers. The language in the film was very interesting because there's a lot of dialects going on. And actually, I did a podcast at USC with a woman who that's her focus is language, and she was blown away by, and I wasn't even aware of it. That was more the crew, the cast, and producers really making sure that the way that the Armenians spoke to the Russians, how they would speak in front of Russians, the repatriates, if they're from Syria, from the accents in the film were all very, and I was oblivious to all of it. So even my accent, I guess you're right.
Another person who saw the film said that what they really liked was the Western Armenian who's pounding away at rocks and says, Charlie Chaplin, we invented beer, we invented wine,
Yeah,
we invented the Chinese Bible.
Yeah, that's because every Armenian has an uncle or a cousin who is that guy. So,
but that it was specifically Western Armenian is what this one person.
The accent, which actually is great. The actor who played that, David Hagopian, is he's from here, so he's doing a Western accent, and he does it very well. Yeah.
But it's so interesting so in other words, your collaborators are in a way giving you that kind of precision and that kind of progress, that narrative arc in how you're speaking, perhaps sometimes without you even quite realizing it.
Yeah, so the thing is that I've been on a lot of sets as an actor, and the director is really, what is directing, I would say the number one thing is they're the person that is setting the tone for how this production is going. And what's the tone on set? What does it feel like? And I've been on sets that are incredibly toxic and you can't wait to be done, where everybody's working because they're under threat by a tyrant. I've also been on sets where it's so collaborative that it's a terrible movie because it's everybody. Yeah, everybody's got an opinion. Oh well, I guess we'll go this way. I guess so. You need to be able to both be open, but not so open that your brain falls out. You have to be able to take in what people say and suggestions and stuff, but also we're going in this direction. We decide this is where we're going. So for me, the tone on set and the tone of a production, for whatever reason, I try to encourage other people that I'm working with to bring out the best of them, to not try to force them to do what I want, but like work with them so that they're as inspired as I am about what we're trying to make. So it's not about like my vision. It's not about, we're all trying to make this thing up here, this film. And when I can get you to see it and be into it, so, for instance, when we were stuck in COVID, the production team, we were in lockdown for probably 2 months before we could shoot. They would sneak up to the set to work on it, like on their own, like add things to the cell, and because they cared about it. So for me, that's that's the kind of, I feel like that's the best way to collaborate.
And did you feel at the end of the day, it sounds like your set, your crew, this was not toxic? Was it a lot of fun?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. And I'll tell you why, because even though we had a lot of very difficult things, especially because of COVID, but also because of COVID, I remember very clearly we had several periods where we had to stop. First lockdown happened, and then it was 2 months before we were allowed to shoot anything. What they allowed us to shoot was just the scenes that were in the cell that involved just me. So there weren't too many people gathering, that kind of thing. That first day back was like one of the happiest days of shooting I've ever had. Everybody was so excited just to do something again, just to work. So a lot of that bled into the film too. My cinematographer Hassam likes to say that you can feel everybody's fingerprints on this film.
Yeah, I think so. And Ben, just to continue this thought, many people have visions of the journalist as the lone wolf, the person who single-handedly does the story, tells the story. And one of the things that we see with you is that you have clearly done that, and now you're collaborating with other people. So tell us, and you also started off as a fiction writer, which again, many people would have this image of the person in the cabin by themselves. So collaborating, tell us about what that's like for you as you're doing this more and more.
Sure. Yeah, I like collaborating. This was an interesting and really productive project for me because of that because we had a lot of people in the room, or we had kind of four main freelancers on this project, and then ultimately we brought in more and more people. And we had collaborators in Kazakhstan, where we had sort of some of the sound design took place there. Anyway, it was a big team, and my role was, as the reporter and co-writer and one of the developers of the project. At a certain point in post-production, I just kind of became an advisor. At a certain point, what was happening was like a lot of technical tweaks, washes and textures and moving dialogue, and I could just kind of say if it felt right or wrong. But for me, from the conception of this project, there was both a VR film and a magazine-style long-form piece, and so this was also good because when I felt like we were losing some density of information in the film, I could console myself by saying like, well, there's going to be this really long written text that will be quite dense. And indeed, that was important for us also because there was so much happening in Xinjiang outside of the camps that we knew we could not depict in the VR. The film is really constrained by its environments, the environments we chose to animate. But in the the web feature, which also incorporates the film, elements of the film, you sort of scroll through it, and it kind of takes you through some of these environments, and we built other environments for this scrolly, as we called it internally.
The security cameras in Xinjiang.
Yeah. You learn quite a bit more about what's happening in the cities. I also brought in other protagonists, other interviews. So some people could speak to forced sterilization, which was a widespread phenomenon among Uyghurs in China. Someone could talk about party cadres being placed in people's homes, or being forced to give public confessions of kind of political crimes. These are all things that weren't in the film, but we were able to include in the web feature. And yeah, the kind of nature of the collaboration changed depending on the medium. Like I was working with the artist, and I was also working with my collaborator, but I was the one writing it, so I kind of I maybe was like more involved in terms of like the actual visual look of the film. I was more of an advisor. We kind of each found our role to play. This was also a COVID project, as it happens, and I don't think it ever would have become as involved or ambitious or as expensive as it was if it hadn't been a COVID project, because we all would have been busy with other things. I would have been reporting my book instead of stuck in Germany. So we did the whole thing. I mean, we met several times a week over Zoom for about 8 months. None of us had that much else going on. We were able to find other funding for the film. The film ballooned in length to basically the maximum length you can have a VR film before people's necks start to hurt. So we had to find more funding for it. And I think we ended up having a very good collaboration. We ended up finding a rhythm between the artist, myself, the VR director, and the technical director. And then ultimately we brought in people from the New Yorker to also give feedback and help kind of guide and produce. So yeah, it was a great, it's not what every project for me is going to be like. There's always, of course, this kind of like fiction of collaboration with your subjects, which is like maybe a discussion for another time. Right. But you're usually collaborating with an editor. But this was definitely different for me in that we were really kind of creating together. But I don't think there was that much toe stepping. Like I don't think anyone felt unheard. But we did have these productive arguments about accuracy and like what do we depict, what do we not depict, that kind of thing, which for me were very productive.
And as you were just saying earlier, that you're also figuring out the burden of the storytelling. Look, this is going to work better visually to get that claustrophobic feeling.
Right.
The words can do the lifting for some of the other material. We're running out of time. We're about to get to questions. As we transition to questions, I wanted to first with Molly and then with you all. But I think, Michael, you touched on it as well, is you want to reach an audience. One of the reasons when we talk about visualizing realities, storytelling, is that, yes, you can write the long New Yorker piece, and we all wish everyone would read that. I encourage you to. But there are other ways of storytelling which reaches a different and wider audience. And Molly, one of the things that's great about the vibrancy of your work is I get the feeling that you reach people that someone in a bureau of the New York Times may not reach. So how do you go about thinking about audience and reaching audience? And while you're talking, maybe we can have someone if they want to raise their hand, we'll get to the mics to the first questionnaire, but why don't you start off with that?
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily that different than how any other journalist tries to reach an audience. You write a different piece, right, for the New York Review of Books than you would if you were writing for Vice, or a different style. I think the thing with my work is that there's a lot of people that just don't read the news. Like, they just don't read it at all. They don't read, just to be quite frank. I have friends who everything they know about the news, they know about from TikTok, right? Yeah. And I think that there are many people have told me who love my work because I'm an artist, and that was the gateway drug that drew them to learning about things like, for instance, Guantanamo Bay or the American prison system, or Puerto Rico, the small island colony my father is from. And it was exactly because I drew and because they felt like it was something that was made for them and speaking to them, even though they didn't, have college degrees, even though they weren't experts, even though they, maybe even never read books periodically. I think that art was something that broke through that.
Yeah, great. That's a great note to end this panel on. Thank you so much, Michael, Ben, Molly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.